My name is Kayla Ruggie. I am the brain behind this project, and this is a project for my Concepts of Culture class. So when we were assigned this project, really we could do anything with it as long as it's taking what we've learned outside of the classroom. And I was sitting around one day and I was just like, what am I most interested in right now? And as someone who wants to be a funeral director, I thought, well, the thing I'm most interested in, weirdly enough, is death and grief and how people experience that, whether that be completely isolated from the people they know and love, or whether they're just going through the steps with their family members and they're just having a hard time. So I was like, well, I want to make this video a type of resource for people and just something that we can learn through. And there's no prerequisites for this video. You don't have to experience grief. If you have a family member perhaps or a friend going through grief, I think it does the exact same thing, and I really hope that it's a learning point for experiences of grief and people who want to learn more about how to help those experiencing grief. So one of the readings in my class was Don DeLillo's White Noise. And the main character, Jack Gladney, is just obsessed with dying, and it overtakes his life in such a way that he can't live happily every day because he's so concerned about that. And I thought that was really interesting. You don't see that too much anymore. In fact, we see the opposite a lot. So I was like, it really stuck with me throughout the course. And then I also remembered back to a reading response I did on Mary Louise Pratt's Arts of the Contact Zone. And reading those two alongside each other, I thought, well, what if Don DeLillo wrote Jack Gladney's character with some type of access to a contact zone, and how would that have changed Jack Gladney's life, and how would that project onto his family and his friends and just the way he lived his life? So that really inspired this project, I guess you could say. Yeah, so Mary Louise Pratt talks about revelation and joy and just there's so many positives of the contact zone, and I was just like, we still need that today with something like death. And what if we could make death and grieving like something that's not taboo or something that people don't feel like they can talk about? Because unfortunately, it's just something that people don't feel right talking to people about, when it's just one of those things that happens every single day. And it's something we should be talking about. In fact, it's so cathartic that people's lives change after they talk to one person about maybe the death they're going through, or how their friend is reacting to the death of someone important in their family. So I just think it's so important to have those two aspects, that experience and that revelation, to bring those together so that we can talk about them. So I guess that's another plan behind this project, and I really hope that we can do that with this project. So when I was thinking about it, working this Death as a Contact Zone project, I was like, how can I turn this idea into something that's gonna serve well for people? There were options like an article we could read or a letter we could write to someone, and I just thought, how can I connect with people on a level that they're gonna be able to talk about this with me, and to not flesh out their life story per se, but to be open to this communication that Pratt encourages. And I wanted to be like her, and I thought, well, maybe if I just ask people and see if people are willing to answer these questions, maybe that'll get a lot out of it. So I, in true millennial fashion, I went on Instagram and I put out a story, just, you know, whatever. I was like, does anyone want to be a part of a contact zone? And actually I got a lot of responses within minutes, which was really actually quite amazing to see. I was very humbled. There were a lot of messages of encouragement and hopefulness, and people saying, wow, this is like something I've never heard of before, like something so cool. And I was just like, whoa. And then most importantly, there were people who wanted to take part, which was the best part. It was so exciting. It was awesome. So yeah, so at first I wasn't sure, like, should I interview random people? But now that I had this group of people who wanted to participate, I kind of X'd off, I guess, the idea of asking random people. It's a little bit too the questions are quite heavy, so it's a little bit too much to ask random people, I think. So I sent out a big long email and people answered, and I sent out my questions so they could reflect on them, and I'm just so thankful for those people. So I just wanted to say thanks before we start the video to the well-wishers, and there were also people who wanted to participate but couldn't find the time or couldn't schedule properly or couldn't find the words, and I still want to say thank you to you too, especially because with your messages was a lot of encouragement, and I hope that this video encourages you a lot. And to my participants, thank you so much, and I hope you love this video as much as I do. And remember that this is a starting point, and I really think that together we've created a contact zone for those carrying or watching others carry grief, and that's something pretty irreplaceable.
I think absolutely, yeah, because when we start to talk about things more, you realize that there's a support group around you, so that when death actually does happen, you know where to go, you know who to talk to. It just supports you mentally, like just physically, like hugs and stuff like that,
yeah,
right?
For
so
sure.
yeah, it's really beneficial for people to talk about it instead of like being in their room all like secluded and thinking their own thoughts, when you can get like other opinions and different beliefs and stuff like that from around you to further help you grapple with it.
For sure. And then do you already view death as a type of contact zone, or do you feel like it's a bit more taboo and like we can't really talk about it?
Just in like my life, I guess it is a contact zone. Like I work in a nursing home, so I deal with death like all the time. So it's really nice to talk to like coworkers about like a death of a resident or whatever, or even just like grandparents and stuff like that with like friends when their grandparents pass away. Like you make sure to go and like talk to them about it, make sure they're okay. And then like even just with the church community, I find that with when a member of the church dies, we're all very unified and want to support one another and be there for one another. So in that way, yeah.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that, because I feel like you write about it later, but something about it's a taboo topic, and I was trying to think of a really good thing to relate it to, but it's basically like everybody knows about it, but nobody knows how to deal with it, and nobody prepares to deal with it until they're like thrown into the situation, and then you know you're kind of dealing with this grief, but everyone kind of has their own idea of a timeline of how long you should be processing a death or and grieving afterwards, and then you know it gets old. You know what I mean? After a while, your loved ones kind of start to withdraw from, especially if one person in general is really affected, but your loved ones kind of start to withdraw on their own because nobody relates the same.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like me, for example, when I grieve about things, I have to be vocal about it, and it's a very, very drawn out process for me. It takes a really long time for me to get it out and to kind of understand and come to terms with how and why things happen the way they did.
I think so, yeah. There's always like room for like more communication, especially with death, because so many people are just unknown about it. All everyone says is, I need some space. And sometimes space is like one of the worst things that you can have, especially if you're going through something. You want to be around people you want to talk about. You want to talk about someone's life. You want to like celebrate how they lived, right? And most of the time it's just you're crying alone in your bed.
You know, when you lose someone or something, and you haven't lost anyone for a while, it all of a sudden comes flooding back. And so but I feel like we should almost be keeping on top of healthy relationships and being able to live our lives in a healthy manner and like learning how to grieve with things. And I guess that there are good ways to go about that. It's hard because not everybody goes through it all the time. There's people who are constantly losing other people or constantly dealing with grief. I mean, it takes years to be able to cope. And even then you're hit sporadically with memories or with, you know, just missing that person. So, better ways to cope with it is, keep on coming up with more ideas now. But more than anything, I guess maybe just communication with people.
Death has to teach us a lot. Like, it teaches us about the finite nature of man and how, like, we're mortal, and we have a specific time here on Earth. It shows us, like, the power of God in a way, because it shows that He's in control of everything.
That's a loaded question. I guess I'm kind of the person that believes that whatever you go through, you're going to learn something from it. Whether that's as someone who's grieving or as someone who's watching someone else grieve and trying to support them. If I was going to wax a little prosaic, I might say it teaches us that life is meaningful. That we need to make the most of it, that we need to cherish what we have and be thankful for what we have, and be aware that as much as death is an inevitability, you don't know when or where, and you don't know how something like that's going to come into your life and how it's going to impact you.
I think death is like so much to teach us, especially in our Western culture, because it's so individualistic, it's so consuming of this life, consuming of the materials, resources, things in this life, that death is also just like, hold on, like, what's actually going on in this world? So it's kind of death is a very like reflective art, I would say, using those words, kind of, that it forces us to just zoom out of where we are and just be like, hold on, why are we here? What are we doing? So I would say, like, it teaches us to, like, reflect on who we value and why we value them. And it teaches us to realize why we're on this earth and how we can benefit this earth.
A lot of people say, oh, I'm sorry, but there's nothing beyond that. In conversations with family members,
especially when you're younger too, I feel like a lot of adults don't want to have that conversation, and you just don't know what's going on or how you should feel, especially when it happens to you for the first time.
Yeah, for sure. My ex-girlfriend, she lost her uncle a little back this summer, and there's nothing I could do or help her or anything, because you just be like, I'm sad, but I'm dealing with it, and it's just something you deal with your family alone. You don't really talk to your friends about it. You don't really talk to anyone inside it. You're alone, and that's something that is someone that tries to help. You struggle with it because there's nothing you can actually do. You're just sitting there, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna wait until you get better.
On the sidelines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're just put on the bench, and you're waiting until someone starts to feel better, if they do. And sometimes that doesn't go away, and there's nothing you can do to help them.
Yeah.
So I lost my mother when I was 15, and this is part of why I say how we manage grief has changed significantly over the last 30 years or so. So when I was 15, there was not a lot of wisdom. There was very much sort of that initial onslaught of support and compassion and empathy, but because, and I know I've said this a number of times already, but because people are impatient with the process of grief and how it changes a person and how it overwhelms them to the point that it takes time, eventually that kind of peters out, and you're still left holding this enormous bag of unanswered questions and anger and shock and just mind-numbing sorrow that there wasn't, at that time, there wasn't a lot. There wasn't a lot that I could say that wouldn't get brushed off. There wasn't a lot that I could say that wouldn't be sort of neatly wrapped in a platitude that left me more confused than anything else. So yeah, I do think we've come a ways. But I think at that time, in that moment, when I was a teenage girl without her mother, I think there was, if I had had that space, I think so much would have been different for me. So much. Yeah.
I feel like we, as a society, like as a whole, we think way too little about death because we're all like absorbed in the moment and like what's gonna make us happy right now.
Yeah.
We don't think about the future and like the consequences of our actions and stuff like that as much as we should. And then death comes along and we don't really talk about it because with the suppression of, I guess, like when you have a certain religion, like you want to be open to everybody, right? But then you also like have the disagreements about like what happens after death and all that stuff too. So I think we as a society need to talk about it more and just actually think about what is death and what happens after death. But then we also like you get like the other end of the spectrum where people think about death too much and then like you get depressed and all that stuff because you don't know what's gonna happen if you don't have like a solid faith or whatever, and then depression sets in and you become hopeless, right? So there's like definitely a balance there that you need to achieve.
I feel like it comes in waves. You think about death for a little bit, and then you're off of it, and then you're back on it, you know. And for some people, it can kind of change their entire viewpoint of life, you know, that this is always like, this is how everything is going to end. And for other people, I think that they prefer to just not think of it at all. The older we get, the more we kind of acknowledge this. But with our culture nowadays, it's really hard to vocalize that. And even now, I feel like death is almost like a hashtag. It's like a trend, you know, like when there's shootings or when there's celebrities who commit suicide, it's like, oh, this person died, like it's so devastating, but it's like you don't really get the underlying concept of this, you know. You get the idea of it, but you're not like fully grasping the fact that like a life is over.
I don't know. I think death is sort of that thing that keeps us sober, that keeps us just conscious of the fact that life is fragile and not permanent.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
For sure.
Definitely.
I feel like like this was a contact zone for sure because we're talking about it right now, and I feel like more people should participate in projects like this just to open their view on the world and like have a growth, like they make growth choices, right? So you can grow in your personality and all that stuff. So yeah, this is a good thing.
I have not stopped thinking about this. Definitely a contact zone, for sure. And in a sense, I feel like it almost made me develop a game plan for coping. And who knows, I might not stick to it. I probably won't because I'm so dramatic. But it kind of just straightens out your vision of like, there's two sides to this, you know, like I'm allowed to grieve, but at the same time I can't hold myself there. And I think that this really helped me to even be aware of other, you know, there's different people, there's different lives that are dealing with grief and that they all deal with it differently. I really like this project. It was really cool for me.
So by having these initiatives, it kind of helps me learn how to be a better friend to people who experience that, and also be prepared for if I ever have to experience it. Because sometimes personally, because I haven't experienced much of it, it's hard for me to be a comfort to them. So by having these more initiatives, it's kind of more open conversation on learning.
I think the more that we're able to talk about it, the better it is. I remember as I sort of came out of the immensity of my grief when I was a teenager, I remember telling someone, when I'm normal, I think I want to be a counselor. And I think,
I thought the exact same.
And I think all that came from is just that part of me that wanted to make sure that anyone else going through it had someone sitting across a table from them that understood.
Yeah.
I think there is an immense need within grief to have that sense of empathy, to have a sense of belonging, to have that reassurance that everything you're feeling is 100% normal, and that it will not be that way forever. So to me, I kind of get goosebumps. So I'm a writer. I write a lot about grief. I try to make it as tangible and accessible to people who may not have experienced that, who might need to reach out to someone. So for me, participating in this was 100% heartfelt. And I think it'll be beneficial. I think if people are allowed to hear people's stories, and if we can make it more acceptable to speak openly about it, as much as grief is very intensely personal, I think there are so many things inherent in grief that are common.